I was on the Mormon Stories podcast Facebook page this week, and somebody was tearing down Christianity. I wanted to write back, but I thought it would be better to do a full video, talk about the comment, and give some thoughtful responses. Hi, I am Kai Van Leuven. I used to be a true believing Mormon, and this is what I did after leaving the church.
I'm Di Beals. I'm a pastor at Venture Church in Washington, along for the ride, as usual, ready to make comments.
All right, Di, this could be an episode for us that is maybe a little bit, we get to talk about Christianity.
Okay.
In light of in an ex-Mormon space.
Finally, something I can talk about that I know.
Hey, we're going to have some fun. So we are going to do a response to this comment from the Mormon Stories podcast Facebook page, which that is a really vibrant page. I'm always on there. I think that maybe people think I'm really not trying to be antagonistic. I'm just talk about being a Christian on there. I don't know. I'll just throw that out there that all of everything that I write in there is in love to people. But we are going to give this response. Di, are you ready for the comment?
I think so.
I'm so glad you don't get offended.
I'm unoffendable.
Okay, let's get into it. I'll go ahead and read it, Di, so you can process it as in time. After leaving Mormonism, I explored other versions of Christianity. They're talking about you, Di. Only to find that the Mormon version was about as wholesome as it gets. It doesn't get any better elsewhere. Talking about you, Di. I've certainly come to the conclusion that it's all nonsense. But I find it easier defending many of the weird Mormon doctrines than Christianity in general. For one, the concept of the Trinity is nothing short of utterly ridiculous. But the one that really gets me is that all, in quotes, is all you have to do is believed and you are saved, end quote. So the rapist pedophile on death row who suddenly says he believes in Jesus gets a free pass, but the agnostic scientist who lived a wholesome life but follows the evidence in front of his face gets eternity of hellfire.
Okay. There's a few loaded statements in there to begin with, but behind the comments are some sincere questions. So I'm going to treat it like these are sincere questions. So I think they are. And I think they are widely held, and they live in the category of most frequently asked questions that I've ever received. And there's not like, well, here is the prescription, let's paste it on you. But you want me to go? Are you ready for me to just talk?
Hey, Di, we're buckled up.
Okay.
Jesus for Mormons? I mean, heck, we could shut down today. Who knows?
Okay.
I mean, or our faith could be strengthened. We could have a faith promoting rumor going around right now. One or the other, Di. So,
okay,
go ahead.
So there are a few questions tied in there. So we have the Trinity. If I just pull up the big ones, the Trinity, and whether or not you can, quote, just believe and be saved. Okay, but those are actually really tied together. So I'm going to hit them one at a time, but hopefully they tie well together. And then I'm going to ask you to give me your feedback too.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. So let's start with the second part of it, which is the just believing part, because really the question behind that is, should God forgive and accept everyone? And it tied in there is whether or not God should be angry. So there's actually probably a stronger amount of people who don't like that God appears to be angry. So if we just take the God, why is God so mad side of it, that question first, unfortunately, it's just not super sound logic. There's a lot of logic involved here, and I don't want to get too philosophical, but just logically speaking, it's not sound logic to think that love and anger can't go together. They can coexist. In fact, anger is a response often because of love. So the opposite of love is not anger. The opposite of love is hate. And the most extreme form of hate is indifference, just not caring. So if you think about that logically, if you love somebody, you care deeply. And if you don't care, that is how you communicate, I don't love you. Okay. So
Okay.
I would propose God should be angry. That's my first statement. Your comment to that.
I just automatically went to the Lumineers. The
Okay.
opposite of love is indifference, which is
Yeah.
what they said in one of their
Yep.
songs, which is
Yep.
true,
Good.
right?
Pop culture helped you out.
Hey, why not? No, I think that's good, right? Like you don't want it both, like God talking out of both sides of his mouth, right? He could say, "Oh, I'm angry at you for eternity," which you guys would probably think is like unjust. Like, hey, I just screwed up like a little bit, I just dropped like 5 F-bombs, right? Like I just screwed up a little bit, So you can't be mad at me for eternity, right? And then
Right.
at the other end of it, well, this is just like too easy. Like,
Right.
this,
Right.
so there's
Okay,
this
so that's
there's this
that's
pendulum
the
of
line we're
people,
walking. Yep,
right?
yep, we're walking that line. So I would propose God should be angry. Okay, so that probably is going to cause a reaction. I would like to define that a little bit and say God's anger is not a retaliatory, explosive, wrathful, how many people can I smash and destroy? And, it's not that kind of anger. His anger is directed at that which is destroying what he loves. And what he loves is actually who he loves, which is people, all people. So if God is a God of love, which we're not building that foundation of how do we know God is a God of love, but if we just go with God exists and he's a God of love, then he is angry at what destroys his people, and sin destroys his people. So our pedophile sitting in a jail somewhere, certainly his sin is destroying him, but so is the sins all over the gamut, jealousy or hatred or unforgiveness, and et cetera, et cetera. You with me so far?
Tracking, die.
Okay. Any thoughts so far?
No, I think that I do have some thoughts.
Okay.
Can I just kind of go with these a little bit? I want to say first, I think that your response is die angry. I sent you this screenshot of the comment, and you read over it. And what I think is really cool is you weren't like going after this person. Oh my gosh, what an idiot. Who would say this? This is like, which I think a lot of times people can get defensive about their belief system. Instead, I sent you that screenshot, and the screenshot I'm referring to is the post that was put on the Mormon Stories podcast that I read a little earlier from an anonymous person. I sent it over to you, and this was Di's immediate response. She didn't take hours. She said, "This is a very sincere and very intelligent question." Which I actually thought was really cool, that you didn't just discount it. You said, like, okay, like, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Let's have a dialogue. And I think that's cool. So I put on this slide, for those of you who can't see, it says, "Is Di angry?" And the answer is no. I mean,
No.
Di, are you angry? I guess I shouldn't answer for you.
No.
Okay.
Super not angry. I love thoughtful questions. I love to entertain questions.
Yeah. And I think also when we're talking about apologetics, I'm just going to speak for myself here. Apologetics are really probably what made me leave the Mormon church. And I realized that in hindsight. And one reason why I hate apologetics is because there are no silver bullets. There are no like, hey, if you
Yeah.
just watch this one YouTube video made by Dai and Kai on this, then you're gonna believe. That's not the way it works,
Right.
right? Like it's a faith-based thing that
But
we
okay, but the logic is we're all looking for something logical. So if part of the problem with Mormonism, from what I've come to understand, is there are holes in the logic that you just sort of have to overlook. And so if I re-steer us back on course, because I've only just introduced the idea of answering these questions,
yeah,
can we take another step in the logic?
sure. Yeah, go
Okay.
for it, Dai.
So there's a theologian, which just means he studies the Bible and he, proposes these biblical ideas of God. His name is Miroslav Volf. That's a mouthful. But he says a couple things that are so profoundly intelligent but logical. One of them is he says, if God were not angry at violence and injustice, because now we're going to really start to dive into injustice a little bit here. And if he didn't bring a final end to both of them, he would not be worthy of worship. Okay, just
Okay.
let that one settle. He goes on to reason logically that a lack of belief in a God of equaling it all out or bringing it all to an end would nourish violence inside of us because we have a human urge to equaling it all out. Or vengeance, if you go to the extreme, that urge inside of us of you did this to me, I will get you back, or you did this to someone I love,
Mm,
I will get you back, is just sort of embedded in our fabric of who we are. And if anyone out there listening has suffered any violence done to them or someone they love, they can probably say that they want the perpetrator to pay. And so, if God did not promise some form of divine justice, we could not put our faith in him. We would have to instead take up the sword and go get revenge ourselves. So, that is the core of what that commenter is hitting on. Like, how do we just accept that whatever you did is all just okay? But instead, what we have to believe or we have to understand is that God is going to bring justice in the end. There will be justice. That is very hard for us to understand. And it's really hard for us to be patient on because we want to see the justice played out in front of us. And in fact, the world is full of injustice and continues to be full of injustice. So it's only
I-
when we're sure that God will even it all out that we can refrain from vengeance ourselves. Okay, so we're good
yeah.
so far? Thoughts so
Yeah, and
far?
I think that's really good. Like a lot of people look at maybe their experience in the Mormon church and they say like, dude, I did everything right. Like according to the way I was raised and what I believed, I did everything right and it all kind of blew up in my face. And that sucks. And like
Yeah,
I'm really upset about that. And and so I think they like at least for me, I'm like, man, I'm gonna get back after the church. Like, come on.
right,
Like
right,
let's with the Mormon church, we'll say, right?
right.
Um but I think that that's a really good point that you make that there is this like there has to be some level of justice and we really don't know what that may
Okay,
look
so
like.
so let's
Okay.
go to that question because we're just following like a logical string of questions here, which
Okay.
people should ask. Like if at any point someone has had a religious experience where they've been told don't ask questions, that's where Di gets angry because we should ask these questions. This is important. So, is God just? Assuming there's a God, if we even just go a step further and assume that this God is loving, now we have to ask the question, is he just? Because it's only when we're sure that he's just that we can trust him. So,
Sure.
if God is a God of love and justice, can a murderer or a rapist or a terrorist or someone who's jealous or angry or bitter or unforgiving, can those people find forgiveness? And the answer is yes, but not on their own. So that forgiveness does not come from ourselves. It doesn't come from our works. It doesn't come from how hard we try. It doesn't come from our performance. It doesn't come from our behavior. We all fall under the same condemnation for sin because every one of us sins. It was introduced to the human race by Adam. That's a shared Mormon and Christian belief. And because we all suffer the same condemnation for the sin we all inherited and we all practice, the only rescue is the work of Jesus on the cross. And that is for all of us. And it is sufficient for all of us.
Well, okay, so I'm going to steelman your argument, or
Okay.
this argument a little bit, by saying that being jealous is not equal to murder.
Okay, so let me just use a Hebrew term because what we're talking about is sin here, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so sin defined in the Hebrew, which is what the Bible was originally written in, means to miss the mark.
Okay.
Okay, so we think sin and we think of it in degrees, like big sin, murder, medium sin, I punch somebody, low level sin, gluttony and jealousy. But sin is all missing the mark. So think of a bullseye on a target. If the mark is the bullseye, but you know, like you and I are playing darts or something, which I used to be really good at actually. And you know, we're not hitting the wall. We're actually hitting the target. We're just not hitting the bullseye. Everything that misses the mark, everything that misses the bullseye is sin. That's the definition of sin, which means we all have missed the mark. So, yes, some have missed it extremely, and some missed it by just a hair, but they're all misses.
Okay.
So, Jesus came to pay the price for our sin, our missing of the mark, whatever
Okay.
that is.
All right. And so how is it justified then? I mean, here we are. We have Ted Bundy, who was Mormon for a little bit. That might throw you off a little bit.
Ooh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's kind of funny. He had his bishop write an affidavit about how good of a guy he was while he was going through all of these court cases. Pretty wild stuff here. Ted Bundy, right? Serial killer. He's from Seattle, right? He has kind of that vibe with us. He goes and he says, "Hey, I believe in Jesus. You know, I want to be saved." What does that mean? What?
It's interesting so I'm going to recommend a book here. It's called Reason for God by Tim Keller. And he just recently passed away, but he was a pastor of a church in New York City, in the Times Square part of New York City, had a lot of young professionals with a lot of skepticism. And so he would do these once a month, bring me your skeptics meetings and just let them ask questions. He's incredibly logical. So he's able to just reframe your question back to you and say, is this what you meant? And so borrowing a Tim Keller idea, I think, and I agree with this idea, I think a lot of people imagine that God casts people into hell, something like this. Person lives their life, maybe they live it relatively well, you know, like that comment, you know, the agnostic who's a scientist who just thinks they're doing the right thing, or you know, or even a person who's just a good person versus, you know, someone who's horrific in all their choices. But we tend to picture hell is, you know, so the person lives their life, they do the best they can, let's go that route, and they die. And as they're being cast into hell by this angry God, and they're falling into the pit of darkness, they're begging God to please forgive them. And he's saying no, and folding his arms and saying, no, this is where you get yours. And instead, they've been given what they were already choosing for their lifetime, right? They were already choosing their life without God. And they get to continue that choice into eternity. That's the choice that they've made. If we take this horrible person and they make a choice to surrender their life to God before they die, only God gets to decide whether or not they receive forgiveness. And he says, assuming they're sincere and not just doing this as like a good fire insurance policy, he would know their heart. He would say, yes, the work of my son on the cross was sufficient for you. We have to remember, Jesus gave his life. The Bible says, while we were still sinning, Jesus gave his life for us. So if anyone should want to fold their arms and say, I'm not going to forgive, it'd be Jesus who gave his life. But Jesus's work is enough. And so if that person says, I want to surrender my life to you, Lord, on their deathbed, Jesus's work is enough.
Okay. So I think there is this idea of surrendering our life or being saved or whatever. I mean, I had no idea what that meant. I think it just means that Jesus is really the captain of our life. We're going to put him as the center of our life. So I want to make sure that language-wise, we're kind of
the Bible
tracking.
says, if you believe in your heart and confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, you'll be saved. That's the definition of salvation right there in the Bible.
Yeah. And so I think a lot of people would look at that and say, well, that's pretty, cheap.
Or we could look at it as lucky us that no matter what we've done, that we could never pay for on our own, the work of Jesus is enough for me.
Okay. And I think that, Di, you are so eloquent. Now we're going to get the Christianity maybe for dummies, or Kai's version of Christianity for dummies. And I do think that there are I just think that there's no silver bullets. Like it's a faith-based system. Not to say I think there's great logic. I think there's great things that you put out there. But I think if you're always looking to disprove it, you're going to disprove it. Like if that is your intention, boom, like I'll help you cut to the chase. I'll help you cut down on any hours of study, whatever. If you are looking to say like, these are the problems, these are the problems, these are the problems, you're going to find them.
Agree. There does come a point where you have to say, I choose to trust that God is going to even it all out in the end, quote unquote.
Yeah. And that may not look really that reasonable for us right now. Mm-hmm. I could use a biblical thing, but I'm not going to use the Bible to help somebody who doesn't really believe it. But there is a parable of the workers, right? I mean, maybe we can think about that, where it's like this person
where they all get paid the same. Yeah.
They all get paid the same and they work different hours.
Yep.
And like, yeah, that would like tick me off right now today. If I went and worked for somebody and then somebody showed up for 30 minutes. But we have to say,
when the ones who work all day go to the manager and say, this isn't fair, he says, but didn't you agree to work for me for the amount I gave you? Who are you to question if I want to be generous to those who only worked an hour?
Yeah. So I think that's important, maybe from a Christian context, but also to say, like, I don't want to be rude. I'm going to be rude, Di. You always got to throw the disclaimer out there, but it's like, who are you to kind of decide where things go, right? Mm-hmm. Like God's kind of calling the shots. If you believe that God exists, he's calling the shots. It's cool. You have an opinion. I don't know. I'm not trying to be like super mean, but at the same time, it's kind of like,
we do live in a world where our opinion really matters.
Yeah. And it matters
everyone to know it.
Yeah. Like the person who created everything, like that has to weigh into his mind. Mm-hmm. No, it doesn't weigh. Like, I'm sorry. That's me maybe not being so nice, but it's true. Okay.
Oh, Trinity. Okay, good. Because Trinity is the next natural piece of this.
Okay, go ahead. I want to hear your response. So for those of you who are listening to this on a podcast, we were told that we don't explain things well enough if you just listen to it on a podcast. So this slide says Trinity versus exaltation. And I'm going to have Di talk a little bit from a Christian perspective about Trinity. Go ahead, Di.
Okay. Well, the Trinity is complex and really hard for the human mind to comprehend. So that's let's just say that right away. But I want to frame it in this bigger idea first, which is if we go back to this God of love. Okay, so the God of love, who's, not a wrathful God who takes out vengeance, but who is just and is angry at the sin that is destroying what he loves, which is people. Okay, so in that framing, it's interesting to consider that for God to be loving, there must be a recipient of his love. I think that's a really big, important statement. So the Trinity, at its most simple, is God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit, separate personalities of God, not personality traits. The Trinity is not personality traits. It's separate beings who are individual and yet one. And so people often ask, well, I thought Christianity was monotheistic, belief in only one God. Correct. So this is not three gods. This is the word is Godhead Trinity that you might hear all the time. Trinity is not actually found in the Bible. It comes from the words tri, unity. So tri-unity, three that are united together. Only one God, three equal persons, and that's really hard for us to understand. Jesus's baptism in Matthew chapter 3 is a good picture of that. So Jesus, which is God the Son, God in the human body, is baptized. As he's baptized, the Bible says that the Holy Spirit descends on him it looks like a dove, and that a voice from heaven, which is the voice of God, says, "This is my son with whom I'm well pleased." Okay, so that's an example of the three operating separately, but yet they're all still one. So I would just like to propose that God did not create humans in order to have something to love. He was already in relationship, and I could actually prove this in scripture, and I won't take the time to do it now. He was in relationship that I would like to say is a loving relationship with the other parts of the Trinity. That's a way deeper conversation.
I have no idea what you're talking about. Sounds pretty rad. Someday we'll get into it. I don't know. Okay. I think that this is where I'm going to split in this episode. Di, you have no idea what direction I'm going in here.
Nope.
So this will be fun. I believe that this split off and why people in the Mormon church have such a hard time with the Trinity is because of Mormon doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm going to make that statement.
Help me understand what that is.
Mormon doctrine is this idea of Trinity versus exaltation. Exaltation is this idea that if you live according to the church's ideals, right? You do all of the ordinances, saving ordinances, all of these things, that you will progress and be exalted and be like God is right now. The ability to create worlds, have offspring, spiritual offspring, have that populate multiple whatever plan. I don't know. I mean, then it gets a little hazy. Okay. I have two quotes that I'm going to share, and this is on our slide. One of these is a very famous one in the ex-Mormon world from the King Follett Discourse. This is Joseph Smith, your boy. Just kidding. In order, and this is him talking in the King Follett Discourse. This is April 7th of 1844. He says, in order to understand the subject of the dead, so that's what he was preaching on during this, for consolation of those that mourn the loss of their friends, it is necessary that we should understand the character and being of God, how he came to be so. For I am going to tell you how God became God. We have imagined and supposed that God was God from all eternity. I will refute that idea. Oh, and take away the veil so that you may see. These ideas are incomprehensible to some, but they are simple. It is the first principle of the gospel to know for a certainty the character of God, and to know that we may converse with him as one man converses with another. Okay, I'm kind of on board with that. And that he was once a man like us. I don't agree with that. Yea, that God himself, the Father of us all, dwelt on earth the same as Jesus Christ himself did, and I will show it from the Bible. Still waiting for those Bible verses. Okay.
Okay, wait. Question.
Yes.
Because there has to be a beginning. So, because I've heard this about Mormonism before,
Sure.
but what's the beginning? Is there not a pre-existent God? Is there not a head God in Mormonism?
It goes back and back and back and back, and it.
No, I mean, like, do Mormons believe that the Big Bang Theory is how the Earth came? Where did we come from?
Well,
where was the first God? Where'd he come from?
Well, I don't know, actually.
That's such a either your faith holds water or doesn't, and that is ground zero right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the argument, I'm trying to go back into my apologetic Mormon brain, is that all of us have always existed in some form. Gosh, I hate getting so as intelligences. Oh, wow. I could go all the way back to the Pearl of Great Price. I think that's in Abraham, where we all existed as intelligences. And so we've all existed just like God has always existed.
Pre-bodily form existed.
Pre-bodily
form.
Yeah.
So in spirit form.
Yeah.
So we're all co-equal. If we become exalted according to Mormon doctrine, we're co-equal with God because there is no head God. We're all exalted into gods. It's like a brotherhood.
I think that, well, God is a title in the Mormon church. So once you receive that stamp of, hey, you've come down, you've received a body, now you get this stamp of, you've done everything you needed to do. You got your temple recommend. You did all that stuff.
You get to go be God of your own planet.
You get to go. Yeah, you get to go be exalted. You get to get the 3 wives. That is Mormon
celestial
doctrine.
sex.
Okay.
Then those spirits inhabit your planet, and then you're God the Father.
And then you are God. You are the God of that sphere.
And then do you send your own Jesus to Earth, or is that just a one-time Jesus?
I don't know if you get to plan your own Jesus. If that's like a plan for if it's like football and you get to draw up a new play, the X's and O's change. Not sure, Di. Okay.
All right. So the God of Earth chose for Jesus to come.
For Jesus.
But
this was a Jesus plan.
Be a man on a different planet somewhere.
Yeah, and oh man, there are so many weird ways.
If I just go back to our original commenter who said something like, I know there's a lot of weird beliefs, but it's easier for me to believe those weird beliefs than the Trinity. You gotta really stretch to believe this stuff.
Yeah, well, not the smoothed out version. The smoothed out version's kind of nice. It's like, yeah. I mean,
but does nobody ask the question, like, where's the origin? Even science provides an origin. I don't agree with science's Big Bang origin, but
yeah, I think that.
In fact, I think it takes more faith to believe in a Big Bang theory than a pre-existent creator. Okay,
Okay, but Di, what I want to say here. Let me get to the end.
You got me fired up.
Okay. Lorenzo Snow said, "As man now is, God once was, and as God now is, man may be." Okay, hammering that home, that idea. But I want to say these are somewhat comfortable ideas in Mormonism, right? I just want to say that this is a somewhat comfortable idea. This is something that we're familiar with. This is something that I don't want to say indoctrinated. I think that's kind of, speaking really like, brainwash, whatever. But these are concepts that we're really comfortable with.
You're comfortable with them because you've heard them so many times.
Because you've heard them your whole life.
Outside of Mormonism is certainly not comfortable with this idea.
That is correct. Okay.
So indoctrinate might be a good phrase there.
Yeah, I think different. I think, Christianity is different. I also wanted to talk about grace. Okay.
Okay.
And I put on this slide, I'll read it. It says amazing grace at the top. It says amazing grace, ... Let's keep it mildly amazing. Okay. Let's keep it mildly amazing. As in, like, if you're like pretty good, that's when it really kicks in. Again, I want to point to Mormon theology.
Mm-hmm.
You are saved by grace after all that you can do.
Yep.
You are saved by grace after all that you can do. I wonder if we're going to come up with a consistent theme for this episode. So, amazing grace. But I do think people who have left the church want it to be mildly amazing. They want it to be like, oh, you said, oh shit. Oh, yeah, you get forgiven for that, right? As opposed to your oh shucks, Oh, well, that makes you worthy of, because you were living such a righteous standard, right? And you said one naughty word. Okay.
Right.
I put some funny things on here for those of you who are looking. It says I put Death Row Records for those of you who are in the 90s hip hop. I put a little picture of that. And then they talked about, I guess maybe I shouldn't joke about the next one, but we do have the hide your kids, hide your wife guy on here. Yeah. I want to bring up this concept, Di. It's MIPO. Now we've heard of PIMO, which means physically in and mentally out. But I think it's so interesting to think about this idea. So this concept of physically in and mentally out is people in the Mormon church who don't believe the theology, but they go every Sunday to try to kind of culturally stay involved, and they just kind of do it for years and they don't really feel anything spiritually, but they're there. Okay.
Yeah.
It's been proposed that ex-Mormons are mentally in. They mentally still believe some of the theology. I'm part of that. Like, I'm not above this, right? I still don't drink. I don't know if I believe in hell. I still have, some Mormon theology ideas that have worked themselves into me. Who knows if they'll ever work themselves out?
Yeah.
Honestly, right? This is not me. This isn't like pity party. This is anything. It's just the way I was raised and what I was taught in my life is these certain ideals, right? I think that's a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to get to the first part of this guy's message and then maybe talk about it a little bit deeper. This is the first part of this posting on the Mormon Stories podcast. He says, after leaving Mormonism, I explored other versions of Christianity only to find that the Mormon version was about as wholesome as it gets.
Yeah, that's the loaded statement I was referring to. There's a lot behind that.
Okay, but stick with me, Di.
Yep.
It doesn't get any better elsewhere. I've certainly come to the conclusion that it's all nonsense, so he's not a believer. Hey, that's cool, man. This is a space for that, for sure. Now, but I find it easier to defend many of the weird Mormon doctrines than Christianity in general. Now, this is where I'm going to prove, as far as I see it, that this person is mentally in and physically out.
Mm-hmm.
Taken straight from Joseph Smith's history. Joseph Smith, I wonder if these two statements are oddly familiar. Joseph Smith went in the sacred grove, as he called it, when he saw God the Father and Jesus Christ, said this: I was answered that I must join none of them, talking about other churches, for they were all wrong. Oh, that sounds familiar.
Mm-hmm.
And that the personage who addressed me said that all their creeds, well, we talked about a few creeds, right? We talked about salvation by grace. We talked about the Trinity, all their creeds.
Mm-hmm.
Justice? Well, that's weird. We're an abomination in his sight. Did Joseph Smith leave this anonymous comment? That those who profess were all corrupt. He's looking your way. That they draw near to me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They teach for the doctrines and commandments of men, having a form of godliness, but they deny the power thereof. Ooh. I find some really interesting similarities between this anonymous comment and how Joseph Smith felt about Christianity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it supports.
I mean, am I wrong,
supports
Di?
your statement. Yeah, you don't even realize maybe how indoctrinated you are, or how much is really deeply underlying your thinking and choices.
Yeah, and I just think that's like, can I just say, you haven't burned it down. Like, if I'm just being straight up, you have not burned down your Mormon theology. You actually hold on to that in spite of the evidence that you have that it is wrong. In spite of the evidence that you have that people were manipulating other people. I put a picture in here. This is Joseph F. Smith, of him and his polygamous wives and his polygamous, and all of his children. Not all of them, probably. That's a lot of wives. But that is the theology and the manipulation and all of that is dictating where you're going.
Yep.
And that is the lens that you are seeing Christianity out of. I'm sorry, Di. Not sorry. That's insane. Like,
not to mention that Christianity isn't a version of Mormonism, and Mormonism isn't a version of Christianity. They're different.
Yeah, to me, it's somebody was having a bad day, came and yelled at me while we were driving down the street about my driving, and I took everything they said to heart because I thought that they were a good, sound conscience and they could lead me in the right direction with my driving. Right? Somebody who, to me, I'm sorry, it makes no sense at all. Like, you're letting something dictate your belief system. And it's so deep seated inside of you that you can't let go. You can't say, oh, like, this is my Mormon brain. This is Mormon theology dictating my future belief system. I'm just saying, I don't agree with it at all. And I think it's detrimental to faith. I think it's because it only gives you, let me finish this. It only gives you one option: to go back to the Mormon church.
Right.
Or actually gives you two options.
Or nothing. Just don't believe in anything.
No, you hate the church.
Yeah, sure.
You leave God, and guess what? You do exactly what they say you should do.
Yeah, right.
Which is be an evil apostate that persecutes the church, right? Like, you go from one or the other.
Yeah.
So again, the church is dictating your theology. Period.
Yeah, agree.
Okay. Now you got me all riled up, Ty.
I didn't rile you up.
I know I got myself riled up. But okay. And maybe we'll bring it back and I'll be a little nicer.
Right.
Okay?
Let's tie a bow.
Yeah, let's
bow.
Kai be a little nicer at the end of this. I wanted to ask this question: is transitioning to Christianity difficult? And I really do have a lot, like, I'm not trying to go after this person posting. I actually view their comments. I think the reason why it gets my attention is because it hits home to me so hard,
Mhm.
right? After I left the Mormon church, I shared a lot of their same feelings. And so it's like when you see somebody do something and you're like, don't do it, like you're trying to like just pull them in, and they're like, no, like you're not trying to help me or have the truth or whatever, right? And so I see it like it was so difficult for me to push off a lot of those ideas and look at Christianity with a whole new lens and
Mhm.
a whole new brain and a desire to want to find out something about it. Um, and I think that's really difficult. It's really difficult to put what I'm going to put that in quotes, which I felt like, man, I know Mormon doctrine really well, and I know a lot about it,
Mhm.
to kind of put that off to the side and say, well, maybe I don't.
Mm.
I think that's really hard and
Well,
humbling.
probably the
And
trust is hard too. How do you trust a quote unquote religious leader? How do you trust a church set of beliefs? How do you trust when your trust was so broken?
yeah, and God in general, right?
Sure.
If he exists, God, right? Um, yeah. And so I sincerely am like, I guess the reason why I get passionate about it is because I really feel like I was there for a long time.
Mhm.
And it was hard for me to transition. It was hard for
Yeah.
me to swallow that. And it was easier for me to like poke holes at Christianity or poke holes at other people within it or ideas. Um, so I would encourage people to just try. We kind of talk about this experimentation.
Mhm.
Try, and don't try to see it through any type of lens. Just try to see it through um, a very open view of like, well, is this real? Is this
Mhm.
something that's supposed to speak to me
Yeah.
and do that? So that would be
And
my
maybe find
encouragement.
find somebody who like I welcome questions. I'm really okay with getting in the journey with people and walking it out. It's not always a pretty path to try and deprogram what was maybe incorrectly embedded in your thinking. And I'm not the world's smartest person. So I don't have the answers to everything, but I'm so happy to come alongside of people and listen while they really wrestle it out. Wrestling, I used your word.
There we go.
So finding someone who is patient and can help you wrestle through it, I think is a healthy option too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. So we love you guys.
Send
Feel
us your
free to,
questions.
yeah, write us questions, put a comment down below.
Tell me you think
I
I'm mad.
yeah, you're not talking
Jesus
about
for
die. You're
Jesus for
talking about
Mormons at
guy.
gmail.com.
Yeah. Yeah. If you and we're totally open to anything. If you have any type of response, gosh, we'd love to hear it. And
Yeah.
we'd love to help you guys out and just kind of go from there. So yeah, with that, yeah, until next time.